is Carolina Haints. Carolina Haints presents Folk, a show about our stories. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Folklore is filled with tales of ordinary people who have been immortalized through various sets of circumstance. And while the real-life person may not be all that extraordinary, it only takes a few peculiarities to create a folklore persona. Such a persona is usually the basis of a story or a whole slew of stories, or even ballads or limericks. Such was the case of Old Dan Tucker, whose 18th century frugality and self-reliance became the thing of legend. Like many Americans of the time period, Dan immigrated to the colonies as a small child. Born in London, Dan grew up in Bath, North Carolina. But as an adult, he got married and moved further inland to the area we know today as Randolph County. Now, keep in mind, there was no bustling town of Asheboro. These areas were scantily populated at best. Being self-reliant wasn't an option. It was a way of life. Dan Tucker found a natural spring and decided to set his stake for a homestead. He built a log cabin from the locally sourced lumber from his backyard. And not having access to a blacksmith, he was able to hold the lumber together using wooden pegs. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't build a doghouse without power tools, but this guy was able to cut down the trees himself, fashion them into the appropriate sized logs, move them into place, and all without any ironwork. Well, to me, that's downright impressive. And I'd imagine if I could do that, I'd feel like I could do just about anything. And so Old Dan Tucker, as he came to be known, became somewhat of a hermit. He realized that he could do without many household comforts and would find multiple uses for various items. For instance, he was known to use a frying pan for all manner of things, in addition to cooking, of course. And if you start from there, you can see how these little peculiarities become humorous anecdotes told by his neighbors. And this self-reliance may have ultimately been a bit prideful as well. Anyone who didn't know him might mistake his intentions as rude, but Old Dan would never accept a dinner invitation from a neighbor or a friend. He never wanted to be in anyone's debt and always wanted to provide for himself. So it was said that when he refused to stay for supper, or oftentimes the case, dropped by later in the evening, that he was too late to get his supper. And for someone so content to manage his own affairs, he died as a result of mending to his own crops. One day, he was out plowing the garden when he stepped on something sharp that embedded in his foot. Apparently, Dan's self-remedy was to cut it out himself with a dirty knife. Well, of course, this led to the wound getting infected, and within a short time, lockjaw set in. Dan didn't last too long in that condition. But you can also hear his neighbor's fond remembrance in the line that he, quote, died with a toothache in his heel. Despite the jokes and limericks made at his expense, to be honest, his friends and neighbors were quite fond of Old Dan Tucker. The song that came up with in his honor had been sung and sung for several hundred years now and is the thing of folklore legend. It's been covered by some of the greats, from the Andy Griffith Show to Grandpa Jones and even Bruce Springsteen. It goes a little something like this.
Old Dan Tucker was a fine old man, washed his face in a frying pan, combed his hair with a wagon wheel, died with a toothache in his heel. Get out the way, old Dan Tucker, you're too late to get your supper.
This episode was brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions and Carolina Haints Incorporated, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting folklore storytelling throughout the Carolinas. You can find everything we're up to, including the Carolina Haints book, podcast episodes, and speaking engagements at our website, carolinahaints.com. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Tune in then to keep the tradition of oral storytelling alive.